alliteration, I was sitting here trying to think, like, how will I make a nice alliterative title for this episode? And what I landed on is we got to blend a little Spanish in. We're going to call it Quatre Christmas Canciones con el Jefe.
Nice. Although none of them are Spanish, but
that's
okay.
True, right? Let's see. Oh well, we've got. What do we have? We've got like one that was
French.
originally in Latin. We got French. That's right. So
Two French.
two French. So we it's like we were shooting at a bullseye, and we got our bullets a little outside the center. We came close.
Yeah.
So you know, Jeff, the shortbread baking thing that you did for a previous episode.
Mm-hmm.
It remains one of my favorite things that's ever happened on the podcast.
Shortbread remains one of my favorite things that has ever happened.
Yeah. Have you been doing a lot of shortbread baking this season?
Not a lot, but I made a batch. It was a month or so ago.
Yeah.
And it sits in the freezer, and I take a little bit every once in a while.
Oh, I hadn't realized. I mean, that makes sense. It would freeze well.
Yeah.
My kids and I did try to follow your recipe the year that you did that. When was that? Was that 2020?
I don't
maybe.
Probably. I don't remember very well.
I thought it was delightful. So my kids and I followed your spoken recipe kind of as you went along. In fact, actually, I don't remember if I ever brought this up to you, but I never knew that you could make wheat flour just from like blending up, or excuse me, oat flour from blending up oats, and that saved me in a pinch. Not too long after I had listened to that episode, I ran out of wheat flour and I was baking bread, and so I just add a little oat flour to it. It worked out great.
Nice.
But yeah, my kids and I were following your shortbread recipe, and we were at the time deep in the Lord of the Rings, and so we tried to cut it in the shape of leaves and called it lembas.
Nice. That's perfect. It does hold a good shape, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so I mean, with modern refrigeration, you could make it last a real long time. That's great.
Right.
So let's talk about some Christmas carols. Which one were you thinking would be nice to tackle first?
Oh, it's a good question. These are all great songs, and they're all quite old. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did, and I love that.
Yeah, very old songs. So, well, maybe we start with the oldest. Well, and it's disputable whether it really is the oldest, but O Come, O Come, Emmanuel, some people say it goes back to the 800s.
Oh, really? I had heard like 17th or 16th century, but yeah, so it could be even older than that, huh?
Could be. The earliest written version of the text is from 1710. So it may not really be that old, but some people say. But the tune itself, actually just about 50 years ago, somebody found the tune in a collection of Gregorian chants, medieval chants from the 1400s. So the tune is very old. The text may be old as well.
That's a big part of what is so what grips me so completely, these songs, these ones, and old hymn tunes as well, that because like an institution like a church has a preserving power over things, right? Whether it's books, literature, it's just stories, whether they're told or not, like a government can have the same effect, but as there are some religious institutions that have outlasted typical governments, libraries burned down, stuff
Right.
like that, you know what I mean? And so these religious songs end up being like these listenable time machines in some ways, like things. It's like a package for preserving things, and
Right.
Man, you think about how many millions of people have sung or played this melody, over how many centuries, and then to participate in that by also playing it. It just it's beyond what I can quite comprehend. I can't quite grasp how huge that is, but it feels amazing. It's just like magic.
Connecting into this really ancient religious tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I was thinking recently in a similar vein about poets, and as you read in the Old Testament, a variety of the prophets there were poets. And I was thinking about that and thinking, why is that? Is it just that prophets wax poetic, or is it that poets write things down, and so their words are preserved.
Oh, yeah.
And there might be other prophets who weren't poets and they spoke, but nobody wrote it down, and so we don't have their words, but we have the poets' words because they wrote them down.
Ah, that's interesting. The
Um,
prosy ones don't get preserved as long.
yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah. Um,
Huh.
anyway, or
The
there's something about the process of writing poetry maybe that makes you think through ideas and feelings and express them in ways that are more powerful than other ways of communicating maybe, and then
that
that lends itself to music.
that totally makes sense to me. Like on the theme of these religious Christmas carols, there's one I love it like I love it when anytime like a poet manages to cram volumes of meaning into like 3 or 4 words, like just
Mm-hmm.
like the efficiency of it.
Right.
I mean, whether it be religious poetry or secular, just like man, it's such a craft. It's just amazing when that can happen, and it feels like that comes up often. I was just trying to think of what it is. I think it's "Oh Holy Night." I think that's the Christmas carol that I'm thinking of. There's a line that just says, "And the soul felt its worth."
Hmm.
And I just feel like, to me at least, that just feels like an explosion of like of like ideas and feelings and potential meanings that are just packed into so few words.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I think O Come Emmanuel" has some of that,
Mm.
and being an old tune, we actually don't know who wrote it. It was first written in Latin,
Mm.
um, and then translated into English, I think, in the 1800s. Really, not until then,
Mm.
um, but its original text is Latin. It had 7 verses. In the English version, we usually have 4 or 5 in what we're most familiar with.
Mm.
But it is really beautiful words, really a prayer to Emmanuel to redeem us, to save us from captivity, from exile, from the gloomy clouds of night, from the path of misery, and then to bring us to a victory over the grave, to bring us to cheer, to our heavenly home. It's very much this song of redemption, and each verse begins with the words "O come," which is just a strong, hopeful, phrase.
Mm.
O
Mm-hmm.
come, Emmanuel. O come, thou dayspring. And then each verse ends with the refrain, "Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel."
And that
Which,
just to make sure that Emmanuel is a name that Christians use for Jesus. Is that right?
right,
Just
right, and
okay. Yeah.
it means I love this name. It means God with us, which is such a beautiful idea that God sent Jesus to be with us, to be among us, to be one of us. And
Mm-hmm.
we look for someone to come deliver us and save us, and God sends someone to be with us,
Mm.
to mourn with us, to be with us in our sufferings, to feel with us and be a part of us,
Mm. Mm.
which is really kind of a beautiful idea of compassion and mercy and suffering, that God would suffer with us in that way.
Yeah, that is lovely. It makes sense. Like I'm thinking about like the when I was younger, what I might have expected to be like help when I was feeling down, for example. In recent years, as I've dealt with, as many people probably do as they get older, increasing bouts of anxiety or depression, um, finding that like it's not always that actually necessarily that I need somebody to like flip a switch in my brain to make things better. Sometimes really it's just like if someone's willing to sit down next to me and say, "You're right, this does suck." That's actually like the most cathartic thing that
Right.
can possibly happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
I don't think that I would have felt that way when I was younger either, though. So,
Mm.
over time, I guess maybe what works changes or the way we understand our own brains changes or something. But
Yeah.
it's interesting too to me that like I feel like I've heard this tune so many times during my life, around Christmas time, of course. But like I was familiar with the O Come" title. I feel
Mhm.
like I often also see it "Veni, Veni," which must be the Latin, right?
Right. Yes.
But the most, like, I think lyrically, what I've heard the most is probably Latin. And so, like, I know, I'm pretty sure Enya, her recent cover of this one, I think she did it in Latin.
Hmm.
And I think that probably others. My dad was actually a big Gregorian chant fan when I was a kid.
Oh,
We had
really?
we had a bunch of albums of Gregorian chants from like
That's fun.
festivals and stuff like that. And so I heard it a lot in Latin. So I actually have not read through the lyrics in English before. Um, but you mentioned that "O Come Thou Dayspring," and I just am scanning through. And that, speaking of great poetry, what
Yeah.
do you know what that's called, Jeff? When a poet, it's like what comes to my mind is like when was it Romeo and Juliet when he's like, "Shall I compare thee to a this and that?" When you take one thing and you compare it to another thing,
Hmm.
it's like a
Yeah.
poetic device of some kind.
A metaphor.
A
Yeah.
metaphor, yeah. That's
Yeah.
like there's some great poetry out there. "O come thou dayspring from on high, and cheer
Hmm.
us by thy drawing nigh." So it's like the sun coming up, right? And then it says, "Disperse the gloomy clouds of night." That's that's
Yeah.
that's some solid poetry right there. That's great.
It is. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, I hadn't thought of this until just now as we were talking. The tune, the first version they find from it back in the 1400s was actually a burial chant,
Oh,
um,
really?
which I think, well, that seems like a weird juxtaposition that we're using a burial chant for this Christmas song. But then you think about what you were just saying about mourning with someone and God being with us, Emmanuel, God with us. He is with us in our mourning. Mourning for death, mourning for sin, mourning for disease and sorrow and poverty and whatever it is that we mourn for, He is with us in that. And so maybe that's actually perfectly fitting that it
Yeah.
is a burial chant. Um,
Yeah,
God is
that's
with us in
man.
those moments.
That's really interesting because I know that like some versions of this tune I've heard done, they stay minor throughout. And for I don't know if I'm quite hitting the music theory right, if it's a minor or if it's some other kind of mode that is, if it's modal in some way that's close to minor or what exactly. But they stay with that minor feel throughout. But I've heard some versions where when it gets to that "rejoice, rejoice" line, it suddenly hits a major chord,
Hmm.
right? So like it might have been
Mm-hmm.
like A minor throughout, and then suddenly it's C major right there, boom, 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 and then it goes back to minor. And I feel like I can see that,
Hmm.
musically making sense as like this. If it's this burial tune, like man, for the most part, this is really rough. But then like these little tastes of either hope or it's you don't want your loved ones to die, of course, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it has been my experience that like I would definitely prefer to not have the people who I love who have died. I'd rather have them alive with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But accepting that they are now dead, some of the like closest, most bonding experiences that I've had with others who also loved those people, you know, come because that person died. It's like it fuses those of us who are still alive together in our in our shared love of that person who's now dead. And I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little too woo woo poetic myself here, but it feels like I can almost see this as like a musical description of what that experience is like. Mostly
Yeah.
it's terrible. There are these little things that are beautiful that come through as a kind of as a result of the terrible experience, though.
Mm-hmm. That verse that you were just talking about with the day spring, the words there fit this conversation perfectly. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night. But then the next line is, and death's dark shadows put to flight.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Look at that.
Right, and the first line is, "Come thou day spring, come and cheer our spirits
Mm.
with thine advent." So it's this juxtaposition of cheering us in the midst of the gloomy clouds of night and death's dark shadows. Um, and then that line at the end, "Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel," as you mentioned, being that strong major. And then the next line, "Shall come to thee, O Israel." I just realized that is in the future tense. And it's almost as if in this song it's a plea for future relief. It's not relief right now. God is with us in our suffering now, and we are looking forward with a hopeful view of a future day when there will be that release and that deliverance. But
Mm.
now
Mm.
we're in that gloomy night, and we're praying for the light and the cheer to come in the midst of that night, before the future deliverance.
Mm. That's interesting too. Like this is part of what I love about these like old songs and old stories, right? Is like if this was, say in the 7th century, something that people would sing while they gathered around, like a keening tune. Is that what it's called? I think a keening tune, the Scottish like wailing thing, where
I don't
I
know.
think that has something to do with the origins of Pembroke. Keening.
Hmm.
Well, anyway, like I'm just thinking like, oh, Tolkien talked about this idea of textual ruins, right? Where like if you have a text that has passed through many hands and translations over the course of many centuries, then some of what you have in front of you might be from, say, the 18th century, but there might be little pieces in there that are from the 8th century, right? These little ruins that are
Right.
left over still. And it's like, oh, I wonder, like, what if this was the first verse,
Hmm.
it's hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right? And as it moved through the ages and moved from hand to hand, it kind of collected more and more things. Which one are we going to look at now that is similar?
So Come Thou Long Expected Jesus
See, I was going to
was
say it's probably not patapan, right?
right. No, that we'll end on a lighter note.
Okay.
But Come Thou Long Expected Jesus was written by Charles Wesley. He was the brother to the Methodist founder John Wesley.
Oh,
Um,
he isn't John Wesley the despicable spiders in the hands of an angry god guy?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay,
I've
I
I've
might be
heard it. I
wrong.
don't know who said it, but it
Oh,
could
okay.
be. Um, Anyway,
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off track there. Sorry.
it's really it's quite an interesting family, by the way. I think
Yeah.
there were three brothers, all of whom became preachers, I think, and their father was a preacher. And anyway,
Was
quite
this
a
like, were they
interesting
like
family.
colonial America, or am I
No,
thinking of the
in
wrong time period?
similar time period in the 1700s, but in England.
Oh, okay, gotcha,
And they did come over to America for a while, but I think did most of their work in England.
gotcha.
Um, but Charles wrote this song in the early 1700s. It was published in 1744, and it's a response to some of the things we were just talking about, death and sorrow and whatever. Especially, he was kind of mourning about the class divides in England and the
Mm.
poverty and the orphans and everybody around him on the streets, and responding to that with this hope for a future deliverance. A very similar theme to what we're seeing in O Come, Emmanuel.
Mm.
And in his case, he's building on Haggai 2:7, which says, I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come. I love that phrase, the desire of all nations shall come. Again, this hoping, this longing, this forward-looking desire for deliverance.
Hmm.
And so
Haggai
his
is
text,
one of those
yeah,
many smaller books toward the end of the Old Testament, right?
right, right. I think also a poet, probably, right?
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but the first verse, there's just really two verses of this song, and if it's all right, I'll just read the first verse, which again can convey some of these ideas. Come, and it starts with the word come again. Come, thou long expected Jesus. Again, very much a prayer, a pleading for Emmanuel, for Jesus to come. Born to set thy people free. From our fears and sins release us. Let us find our rest in thee. Again, this hope for rest, this pleading for deliverance. Um, and then Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the earth thou art. Dear desire of every nation, joy of every longing heart. This longing, this desire is infused throughout this. Born thy people to deliver, born a child and yet a king. Anyway, it goes on, but just beautiful ideas again of this hope, this still a hope for deliverance
Hmm.
in the midst of all the dreariness of this world. That there can be this hope that gives us some light and some joy, but it's a hope for future deliverance.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I never like, I've heard this song before, but I had no idea this desire of every nation. It's not something that I had ever noted before, nor did I have any idea that that was tied to to uh, to scripture in any way or anything. Um, I
And
mean
yet
that,
alone a scripture like Haggai, which we don't quote very often.
yeah, that's not like that's one of the most popular books, you know.
Right?
It's in there with what else? Zephaniah, I think, is close by,
Yes.
right? That one stands out because it has a Z in the name, right? But Haggai, like,
Right.
what's special about Haggai?
Yeah.
It's
Well, the
interesting too.
desire of nations.
Your idea of like prophet poets is just like bouncing around my brain like a ton here. I've grown up in a religious community and like been familiar with the ideas of prophets and scripture and stuff like that. But it wasn't until really recently actually that I looked at an NRSV version of the Jewish Bible and New Testament as well. That like in that one they format poetry like there'll be like the prose is versified, and then suddenly when there's a poem, like all the text is centered and it's in italics, right?
Hmm.
And I hadn't
Interesting.
realized until really recently how much poetry there is in these old scriptures, because I'm used to reading versions where it's just like straight versified right through, nothing,
Yeah.
no break to give me a hint that there's something else going on there.
That's interesting. I've often thought that Isaiah would benefit from using quote marks. So you
Oh
know
man,
who, so you know who is quoting when,
I
and
think Isaiah would benefit also from like visual aids and all, like there are a lot of things that could help me with that.
right, right. Well, anyway, this song, beautiful words. The music, it's been set to a variety of different tunes. The one that we're going to share here is a Welsh tune from the 1800s. So the most modern of all the things we're talking about today is this Welsh tune, written by a guy named Roland Pritchard before he was 20 years old.
Wow.
which
There you go.
is just remarkable. I think when I look at my life, I think, what have I done? Twice his age, and I haven't written a song yet. But this tune is called, and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce this right, but Hyfordal, I think, is how you say it, something like that. Which is really a beautiful tune, and has been put to a variety of different texts over the years, including another Charles Wesley text called Love Divine, All Loves Excelling, and many, many others. Actually, one, just a little story on this. I was part of a band this summer, a pipe band, and we played the song. My daughter and I play it together and with some harmony by Tim Cummings, and it's just a beautiful harmony. And we played it, and another piper joined with us because he knew the song as well. And he told this story afterwards. He's from the South, and he said that he was invited to play this song at a church one time, and it wasn't a church that he was a part of. He just came and played the song for them. And as he finished, the pastor stood up and said, well, this man has just illustrated this song because the title of that song is Jesus is a friend to sinners, and this man is obviously a sinner, and Jesus is his friend. Which is just a delightful little thing. But Jesus is a friend to sinners, right? And I'm grateful because I need friends.
That's the attitude to have, right? Like,
yeah.
Me too.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah, but anyway, it's a beautiful tune. In our faith tradition, it's often paired with a song called "In Humility Our Savior," which is a beautiful song that we use in our worship services in connection with the communion or the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, and in that moment of pondering on the Savior's sacrifice and the hope for redemption there. But a beautiful tune with, again, wonderful harmonies by Tim Cummings.
And remind me again, Jeff, what was it, this strange twist of fate that brought you and Lizzie to playing bagpipes? Weren't you trying to decide between bagpipes or ukulele? Is that what it was?
That is right, yes.
You ever imagine how things would have been different if the coin had landed on the other side?
Right, this podcast would be a little different.
That's for sure.
Would be in Hawaii, and yeah.
You might have spent a lot more time on an island instead of getting bit by bugs in Nauvoo too, huh?
Right. Yeah.
Well, let's shift then.
Okay.
You want to go patapan direction or bring a torch direction?
Well, they're both French, so let's go French.
Let's go French first of all, yeah.
Maybe since we're talking islands, let's start in the south of France, which is Bring a Torch, Jeanette Isabella, which is from the Provence region of France, and which is right along the Mediterranean coast. So think of those warm beaches. It's next to Italy. Monaco is right there, sandwiched in the midst of Provence. Beautiful region of France. This song was first printed in 1553, so this is quite an old one. We don't know who wrote the words, we don't know who wrote the music, we can't give any fun backstories to those people, but the tune itself was later used for a drinking song, so that's kind of fun.
There we go.
Yeah, but the song itself is a beautiful little song about two young women, Jeanette and Isabella.
That's a question I was going to ask you. I've always wondered: is this one hyphenated name, or are these two people? I never quite knew.
Two, I think. No, I'm questioning that assumption, but I'm pretty sure it's two.
No, I mean, totally makes sense.
Jeanette and Isabella, yeah.
You know, like you say, who knows, right? It's not like we can, dig up the author and figure it out. So.
Right. Yeah, and kind of common names in France, so probably just generic, not anybody in particular. But maybe the author wrote them about his daughters. We don't know. Or her daughters.
That's a fun idea. I like that idea.
Right.
Yeah, can you imagine a mother sitting down and thinking like, this Christmastide I'll write a song that includes my sweet daughters, and then singing it to them and stuff. That's fun.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeanette, the story, just briefly, Jeanette and Isabella are two young women who are called to come to the stable and bring a torch and invite the village to come and see the beautiful baby Jesus and his beautiful mother. And people come, and it sounds like quite a lot of them come, and they bring a platter of cakes to celebrate, and they come knock on the door, and they're making so much noise that everyone starts to call for them to quiet down, to don't wake the baby Jesus, he's sleeping. And so everyone comes in quietly and gathers around the sleeping baby and admire him smiling in his sleep there. And just a beautiful little scene. I imagine, a really festive, excited group, and then they quiet down and they're still kind of excited looking at the baby Jesus. And just a fun little setting of a scene there.
Yeah.
With that song.
It makes me think of there are so many like sort of like midrash style like extracurricular auxiliary stories, you might say, and characters that get tied into like big old held as important kind of stories. You end up having stories like, I don't know. I'm thinking like maybe you'd end up having stories not just about Odysseus, but also about each one of his crewmates. You know what I mean? Like over time, as a story gets used, a lot people want to use it in their own lives, and it becomes like it starts to look like their own culture and things like that too. And I'm thinking like the drummer boy, the little drummer boy, right? That's a cherished story, and maybe it's kind of a thing that has come up for out of our culture today. You and I, as we're talking, like the culture we kind of come from, and it's just fun to me. Like I hear some people sometimes criticize some of the great German painters who have painted scenes from the Bible, for example, and everybody in these scenes looks German, But like I feel like that's part of the same thing, right? It's like taking this story and like folding it into the world where you live. And so, like, the idea of it sounds very French to me for people to bring like a big platter of cakes and stuff
right,
like that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what's so cool about it,
Right.
And we've got the little drummer boy, and we've got the little torch girls, and we've got the little match girl too, like all of these things, right? They all get tied in.
Yeah. Yeah, that is nice.
It's also funny, right, that like anytime you have a song that talks about being quiet, hush, hush, and we're going to do it on bagpipes. That's
right. We're not helping with the sleeping.
Right. Yeah. Or should I say cornemuse? I think that's what the French call them. Cornemuse.
We'll stand on the hillside far away.
There you go.
Yeah. There's an assumption here when I've read about people talking about this song that Jeanette and Isabella were farm hands or milkmaids or something like that. It's not actually in the text. It doesn't say that. They're just two young women who were called to the stable. But that tradition that they are milkmaids, or maybe connected with the shepherds or something, that tradition carries on in modern day Provence in France, that on Christmas Eve, children will dress as shepherds and milkmaids, and they'll come to midnight mass singing this song and carrying torches and candles.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I found a couple sources that said that. I couldn't find pictures. I didn't look very hard, but anyway.
Yeah.
But that's the story, at least, that continues on today.
That's lovely. And this is like of all the like sort of Christmassy tunes that you hear, this is one that really gets stuck in my head. I find myself whistling this tune all the time. Yeah,
it's a beautiful tune.
I can imagine why people would have used this tune as a drinking song. It's fun, you know. And it kind of has that, like, I can totally like swing my arm, like if I can imagine holding a flagon in one hand, you know, and doing the pirate shanty swing, you know, in front, like it totally fits.
Right. Or you can imagine people dancing and singing as they come to the stable.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Either way, with their cakes.
Jeff, to maybe the one I'm most excited about, partly because of how delightfully silly it sounds.
It's a fun song.
Patapan.
Yes. Patapan.
What is patapan? Is that one of those? Is it just a, you know, like bang? I forget what those words are called. Those words that just mean a sound, you know.
Onomatopoeia.
Yeah,
something like
it
that.
An onomatopoeia? Yeah. Is it just supposed to be someone drumming? Like that's what
it's
you do?
Just to be the sound of the drums. Yeah. And same with the Turaluraloo. The song is about two boys. So now we had two girls, now we have two boys. One bringing his fife and one bringing his drum. And so Turaluraloo is the fife, Patapatapan is the drum.
It's all clicking. It's all making sense.
Yeah. It's like the little drummer boy, except there's two boys and one has a flute.
There we go.
Yeah.
And once again, this is, well, I guess I was gonna place these boys in the stereotypical standard manger scene, but I guess that's not actually what the song is going for anyway, right? It's more like let's all get together and have a party, which is also great.
Yeah. So interesting on this one. Some people have assumed that they were shepherd boys.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
But the song, but as you point out, the song doesn't say that. Mm-hmm. It does sound more like a modern than 1700s community celebration. Right. Yeah. So this song was written by Bernard de la Monnoye, I think. I'm not sure how to say that exactly, in France. Mm-hmm. He was a French lawyer and a poet, obviously. And in the late 1600s, he actually won a national poetry contest 5 times. And,
wow. He was good.
And right, he was good. And the rumors were that the organizers of the contest actually asked him to stop entering so that others could have a chance to win. Right. So anyways, he was a poet, apparently a good one, and he wrote a bunch of hymns and poetic riddles. This may be one of the more famous of his songs. But it tells of these two boys, Guillaume and Robin, who were invited to bring their fife and drum and celebrate Christmas. It's really a fun tune, very lively. If I might, I'll just kind of summarize the lyrics a little bit. And there's actually 4 verses in the French, but in the English it's usually only 3. And they leave out one verse which I think is really delightful, and I'll get to that one at the end. It's actually the 3rd verse, but I'm going to save it for the end because I love it. So the first verse is, William and Robert, bring your fife and drum, with the sound of your instruments, twirl-loo, patapan, will make Noel joyous. And then the second, sorry, this is just kind of not lyrical translation, just translation to get the ideas.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And then the second verse, this is the way that men of old worshipped the King of Kings, with these instruments, twirl-loo, patapan, and we should do the same. Mm-hmm. And then we're skipping the 3rd verse. And then the 4th verse says, God and man are more in agreement, or more at one, than the fife and drum. And with the sound of these instruments, twirl-loo, patapan, let's sing and dance and jump. So very celebratory, fun, lively, playful song. And then the verse that we skipped, the French verse that doesn't exist in the English, which I love. I just found this morning, actually, as I was looking at it. I thought, oh, that's really cool. The 3rd verse says, on this day the devil is conquered. Let's give thanks to Jesus with the sound of these instruments, twirl-loo, patapan. And then the last line is just delightful. It says, essentially, the translation is, thumb your nose at Satan.
That's great.
So let's mock Satan with the sound of our drums, because Jesus has conquered him.
Yeah.
So very fun, playful song.
That's awesome. I like to imagine, too, that and jump thing at the end, like everybody together singing this, hitting their tambourines and stuff, and then all jumping together at the same time.
Right,
so.
Yeah.
Very,
very fun. Yep. Yeah. I speak French, and I was looking at this, and that's how I kind of found that, and I thought, what does that mean, that last line? It was faire la nique in French, and I had to look it up, and it means to mock someone, or one translation said to thumb your nose. Huh. That's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. So here's maybe this is too tangential, Jeff. I have the power to delete this later if I decide this was a bad direction to go. But are you familiar with the Muppets Christmas Carol?
Yes.
In my household, this is the greatest Christmas film ever made. We watch it a lot and quote it a lot and look forward to it every year. We try not to watch it year round, but we just about could. So are you aware that when they first released it in the standard edition, right? Standard as in standard versus widescreen. There's a scene between Scrooge and his lady love where they sing the love. What was it? The love is gone. I think. Well, anyway, at the end of the movie, when Scrooge is with the Cratchits and everybody's there, all having the party, and they all break into this chorus of the love we've found, right? The love we've found will carry with us, so we're never quite alone, right? It's beautiful. But when they released the widescreen version of the film, they removed I'm sorry, I'm not describing this very well. The scene between young Scrooge and his fiancée, they're breaking up, and they're singing this song, right? It's the same melody, and it's the same theme, but it's all about love that we used to have, but it's now gone cold and disappeared, and so we're separating, right? Oh, and so then at the end of the film, it's like an answer to that sad part of the film, right? Where it says, the love we found will carry with us, right? It's like this resolution. And by removing it's like removing the question and leaving the answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As someone who feels passionately about this movie, this is obviously something that I think too much about. But here's the reason it came to mind, is that idea in the 4th verse, right? Where it says, how did you put it? It was something about God and man being more united than drum and pipe.
Yeah.
Or drum and fife.
Yeah.
It's like, is that the answer to the 3rd verse in a way where if the 3rd verse, I don't know, okay, this definitely is getting way too tangential, because I realize now that the reason I thought of that is this idea that etymological origin of diabolical or diabolic is something similar to divided, right?
Mm.
And so if something is diabolical, it's causing division.
Right.
And so,
Interesting. Yeah.
you know, diabolical relating to the devil, right? If you're thumbing your nose at the causes of division, whatever they may be, right? Whatever divisions you're talking about between people, between God and man, etc., right? If that's in the third verse, you're like, that diabolical power now has no power, thumb your nose at it. And then the fourth verse is this, like, answer to that, like, and we are now in such union that it's like a drum and fife, and that throughout we've been playing this drum and fife. I don't know. It feels like a beautiful bow at the
really
end
cool.
when it's all together. And if you take the third verse out, it kind of loses some of its potency, maybe.
Right. Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of that.
I think
That's beautiful.
I might have just been in a fugue state for a minute talking about A Christmas Carol there, Jeff. I'm not even sure how long I ranted on about that, so I'm sorry to have commandeered that.
No, I loved that. That was great.
When I review, I'll time it and see if that was too much. Maybe I'll take it out.
Total tangent, but you can take this out. But my favorite movie of all time is Muppets Treasure Island.
I'm with you, absolutely.
Absolutely the best movie ever, and worth watching over and over and over again.
I could not agree more. I go from feeling like, tell me if you think this is true, but like, in a similar way with Muppet Christmas Carol with is it Michael Caine who plays Scrooge? Like, I've seen all the Muppet movies, and no offense to any human actors in the Muppet movies, but like, what you have to like, in your heart of hearts, see those puppets as real sentient beings, you know, I think.
Right.
And, you know, armchair director here, right? But that's why Michael Caine does so well, and I feel the same way about Tim Curry. Like,
oh, right.
Man, it's so silly, and yet he does it so well. You know, even his singing, you know, the stars will be our compass, you know, like all these things. Like, if he wasn't 100% committed to this being real, it wouldn't be so great. But because he is, it's not kitschy or silly. It's just awesome.
Right. It is. I confess, I've only seen the Muppets Christmas Carol once, and I don't remember it well. But so now I think I need to go reappreciate it.
Yeah, go reappreciate it. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's so delightful.
But I have to find the original non-widescreen version.
Yes. Oh, man. If you can get it, like, on... You know how sometimes DVDs will have the option where you can choose between the two? I believe that the DVD version, if you choose the standard, you still get the whole movie. But if you choose the widescreen, you lose that scene. I think that's the case. So.
Interesting.
But yeah, I well, of course, would always watch something on widescreen if I had the option, but that's the one movie in my entire library that it's like, nope, we're going to watch the real movie the way it was intended to be.
Oh, fun.
Which, of course, as a kid, you know, on the VHS, I always wanted to fast forward through that scene because it's a sad song about love. I don't need that. You know, get me Sattler and Waldorf again. And, you know.
Right. Oh, fun.
Oh, where are we now, Jeff? That was our tunes, right? Those were our tunes.
Those were our tunes. Yep.
Did we put a spot to play the audio for Patapan? I don't think we did yet. Let's listen to that. Let's listen to it here.
Great.
Well, there we go. Another holiday episode down. And thanks again to my good buddy Jeff for coming on and making it happen. I really appreciate all the time that he put into researching these and providing some recordings and stuff like that. You thought that you were free. Well, you're not yet. There's one more song I want to share with you. It's a little shameless promotion for another project. My good buddy Jeremy over at the Way Too Twag Bagpipes and History podcast, and our good friend John Charles, who has been a guest on that podcast and also recently guest hosted a podcast that was really good. I'd highly recommend checking it out if you'd like. We've been working on this fun little project, and we've got one track ready for release this year, and we're working on a full album of stuff like this. So check out this tune. If you like it, check out the show notes. I'll have some links to where you can get it, and you can support the project to get a whole album of this kind of stuff in time for the holidays next year. And speaking of the holidays, I hope you all have some really good ones. Enjoy this time of year and spend some time playing good music and listening to some good music with some good friends and all that. And you're all wonderful. And I'll see you next year. Bye-bye.
I think that's that.